Yeah, so we ended up going receiver with our final pick of the 2020 draft, pick 187 with Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver out of Michigan. Local Detroit, Michigan kid. Was a very highly recruited player coming out of a very successful high school program in Cass Tech. Uh, has played a lot of positions for them in terms of wide receiver, slot, punt returner. Was a guy that we saw after looking at him for 3 years. He was an early declared junior. Was exceptionally athletic, very talented individual. Ended up winning the Offensive Skill Player of the Year for Michigan in 2018 and played immediately as a returner. So this is a guy we really like in terms of the overall size, his speed, and his athleticism to bring to our unit and contribute in whatever manner that our coaches deem fit for him.
Excellent. Thank you, Colton. We're going to open up to questions. Doug, you can start.
Yeah, you sort of already touched on this, and I know you're not, looking back at high school recruiting ratings, but this is a guy athletically who has been rated really high among his peers his whole life. Just when you're evaluating a player like that, can you expand on the idea of those athletic traits versus maybe production that maybe didn't match what was expected of him going to Michigan? What's the balance like in your evaluation?
Yeah, I think a little bit of it is with the high school recruiting process is unfair just because of the unrealistic expectations that these prospects sometimes have and things that really aren't in their control. But a guy who is over 6 feet, he ran a 4.48 at the combine, jumped a 44-inch vertical. Like this guy has those just natural gifts of speed, explosiveness, quickness. And you can see that in his route running, and you can see that when you have the ball in his hands as a returner. And then I think it's unfair to judge a guy just based squarely on production, just because there are a lot of factors that he can't control. But what we saw on the tape is that when he did have his opportunities, that he made the most of it, and he was a very dynamic player once the offense was able to either get him the ball quickly or some of his punt return stuff earlier as a young kid at Michigan.
And not to make everything about comparisons, but obviously this is a deep receiver draft. I mean, when you're talking about Donovan's athletic skills, does it compare in any ways to some of the guys who were taken much higher in this draft in the first, second, and third rounds?
I would agree with some of that because you saw the traits on display at the combine, and you saw some of his numbers being in the top of his class at the combine. But I think you really hit on the head just in terms of being a wide receiver heavy, very deep draft. We still believe we got a very high caliber player this late in the draft. And so that really does excite us moving forward. I think it's unfair to both Donovan and some of the other players that were taken before him to compare, based off of purely athletic traits. There's so many different pieces to the puzzle when you're talking about evaluating a player and then valuing him at a certain point in the draft. But this is a guy that has come in and has produced when he's got the ball in his hands. He's been able to demonstrate and make the most of the opportunities that were given to him. And that's something that really, really stood out to us when we watched him on the field.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Doug. We're going to go to Daryl Ryder.
Hey, I'm just kind of curious. Obviously, you touched on his explosive playmaking ability. What one or two areas of his game do you think he really needs to refine to have the success you're looking for him to have at the NFL level?
Me personally, I think the adjustment from college receiver to NFL receiver is a very wide gap, and it's kind of differs between who you talk to. I think with Donovan in particular, we'd like to see a little bit more consistency in his hands. He makes some extremely acrobatic, athletic catches, and he kind of makes the hard ones look easy, and then sometimes he makes the easy ones look hard. And so I think it's more just cleaning that up and just getting a more consistent hands catcher out of him is an area I think that would benefit both him and our team moving forward.
All right. Thank you, Daryl. Dan?
Hey, Colton, this kind of plays off what Doug was talking about, and you mentioned that he was a highly recruited kid. Obviously, you can say that about a lot of people in the NFL draft, but does that play any role in sort of, when you evaluate guys and when you go back and look at maybe their recruiting process and what they were rated and things like that? Do you go back that far?
I would say we don't go back that far in terms of adjusting how we value the player or where we see him on our board. I think it's more just a piece of the puzzle. We love to see guys who were multiple sport athletes that played, track or ran or did basketball or baseball plus football, because you do see a lot of, different traits that can kind of carry over between multiple different sports. So I wouldn't say like, oh, we took this guy because he's a 5-star kid or he was a number 1 receiver coming out of, Michigan as a prep player. I think it's just more so another feather in his cap where a long time, more so than just the 3 years he spent in Michigan, that he's been a very dynamic and very exciting player to watch since he really has stepped on the football field.
Thank you, Dan. Scott.
Hey, in the receiver class like this, it's so deep. Did that make it more challenging for you guys to kind of rank your board and fit certain guys in certain spots?
With this draft in particular, you saw a lot of very talented players, and I can't remember which analysts made a really good point. Some guys are the slot receiver only, like the small, the very dynamic, a lot of quickness. Other ones are the big jump ball catchers, and then you have sort of the all-around skill sets. I think with this draft in particular, you just had a lot of guys that sort of went into their own categories, but then from each category, they were very productive or very high level or high floor players. So a guy that can come in and compete immediately. So it does make it a little bit difficult when you try to compare across, from the top players at the position all the way through until the 5th, 6th, 7th round. But we try and sort of look at each player for what do they do best, and how do we put them in a position to do that. And I think with Donovan in particular, we saw a guy that does have some explosiveness, that does have the run after catch ability, plus his added punt return production was really sort of a very, very attractive skill set that made us want to go ahead and pull the trigger on him in today's draft.
Besides the obvious height, speed, that kind of thing with him, are there traits you're looking for that fit coach's offense?
Yeah, I think that's something that myself and the rest of the scouts, I don't want to speak for the rest of the scouts, but it's something we're continuing to learn, just with the not being able to be in the building with our coaches, not being able to really see them interact with our players. So we do a lot of, for our defensive staff, our defensive scheme, we did a lot of watching sort of the San Francisco cut-ups that our coaches have made. And now with the offense, we're sort of transitioning more towards all right, let's watch some old Vikings tape to figure out what type of player coach wants to work with. And I think you've kind of seen that us move in that direction. But just at the receiver position, I mean, speed is paramount. That's one of the most important attributes that we like to have at the position. A very close second is just natural football intelligence, because what we ask of our guys is a lot more than what they were asked to do in college, just in terms of conceptually, just route adjustments, different multiple alignments, shifts, motions, some stuff that we've kind of picked up on watching the Vikings old 2019 tape. So it's been a learning curve for all of us. But with each one of our picks, the common theme you can kind of see is we want smart players, we want tough players, we want accountable players. But then within each position group, you have a certain number of position specifics or physical tools that do come into play when we are sort of comparing, one player A to player B.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Scott. We'll go to Tony Grossi.
Hey, Colton. Donovan came across, at least to me, as disappointed, if not even a little shaken by how late he was drafted. And I'm wondering, if someone who's been so naturally gifted his whole life, is there value in that cold bucket of water being dumped on him in this NFL draft process?
You do see sometimes the guys that either are disappointed where they get drafted or sort of let down based off of expectations. And I think it's a good thing to have high expectations, because then you hold yourself to a higher standard and you try and you work your butt off to reach those expectations. If anything, I do see it kind of lights a fire under a lot of these college prospects, just because everybody's going to have an adjustment period once they do come into an NFL building and start practicing with the NFL players. So I don't want to say it's a good thing that, he was drafted in the 6th round where we took him, but we see a guy like that. We got a very, very good value pick, and a guy that we see as, some of his best football might actually be ahead of him based off of his traits and how he fits into our scheme.
Thank you, Tony. We'll finish up with these two. We'll go to Nate Ulrich. Nate, you're open.
Hey, I know you referenced his experience as a punt returner.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on that? How big of a bonus was that? And did you get any feedback from Mike Prefer?
Yeah. So, Coach Prefer met with Donovan at the combine. I don't want to speak for him, what his thoughts were. I'm sure we'll get that at some point, but he is a guy that's been very productive. He was a freshman All-American as a punt returner. And so he does have that big playability. That's almost another added bonus to what he will be able to provide for us in the offensive passing game. So it's almost, it helps his value when it comes to building a roster, especially when it comes to, all right, who are we going to keep up on the active for game day? Who do we kind of see like him fitting? Like, is he going to play outside? Is he going to play inside? And that more is sort of a question for, Coach Prefer and Coach O'Shea and Coach Stefanski to figure out. But whenever you do have an added skill set, whether it's a returner, whether it's a cover player on special teams, where you can, help a team not only on either the offense or defensive side of the ball, but you can help in that special teams game, that definitely adds value to the pick and to your roster position.
Great. Doug, we'll go to you to close it out.
Yeah, Colton, I mean, when you're picking a receiver in the 6th round, does it kind of sometimes just feel like, well, if we're going to take a guy at this position, let's take somebody who's really athletic and see what happens? Like, maybe we'll pop on some upside here. Does that, like, we'll take our shot?
Yeah, there is a little bit of that. You see this. I've seen this a lot in day 3 of the draft. There's a lot more target shooting in terms of teams. Really, boards differ on day 3 because it's is he a good fit for our scheme? Like, what about our needs at the position versus like, okay, this guy is a really good athlete, but he needs some development, or he needs to sort of like reach his ceiling. So that certainly attracted us to it. But don't get me wrong. I think we think Donovan's still a very good receiver. I think he's a very good player. It's more so like an added bonus that he does have great size, he does have great speed, and he does have great athleticism, where, that's the guy that excites you because you can get him in our coaching staff's hands. They can sort of mold him and coach him up and develop him. And then when you hit on a guy like that, you obviously you give yourself a pat on the back, but I think it's a credit to both our coaching and scouting staffs for doing their homework and, making sure we took the time to see, all right, what does he do well? And how do we put him in a position to do that with our team?